Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to picture something for a second.
Right.
You're at home. It's late. Maybe you're scrolling through YouTube, maybe TikTok, and you're feeling a little off, a little down.
We've all been there.
We've all been there. Maybe you just went through a breakup or you're just feeling generally lost. And then the algorithm, in its, terrifyingly accurate way, serves you up a video.
That moment of digital serendipity or something like it.
Right. And the person in the video, she's striking. Intense eyes, very articulate, very confident. And she isn't talking about makeup or video games. She's talking about your deepest, darkest pain.
She's talking about trauma you might not even know you had.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And she's telling you she knows how to fix it because she's been through worse, much, much worse.
And that is the hook. That's the moment the casual viewer meets Teal Swan.
Precisely. And that's why today we're not just talking about another influencer or, a best-selling author. We are really trying to unpack a massive, messy, fascinating phenomenon.
Phenomenon is the right word.
We're talking about Teal Swan. She sits at this. It's an incredibly volatile intersection. You've got viral internet fame on one corner. Then you have serious, heavy mental health advice on another. And on the third corner, intense, and I really mean intense, controversy. It's a name that gets a visceral reaction depending on who you ask. For her followers, and there are millions of them.
Millions.
She's a revolutionary spiritual teacher. Some will tell you she literally saved their life.
And to others.
To others, she represents a really dangerous blurring of lines, between self-help and something much more manipulative.
Which is why this deep dive feels so necessary. We have to figure out what is actually going on here. We've got a huge stack of sources to get through today.
A big stack.
We've got her biography, breaking down everything from her childhood in Utah to her claims of extrasensory abilities. We've got deep dives into her published books, nonfiction, fiction, you name it. And crucially, we have the investigative side. We're looking at reports from the BBC, a big podcast series from Gizmodo, a freeform documentary series.
Oh, yeah.
And some really interesting academic papers that classify her as part of this rising movement they're calling conspirituality.
Spirituality.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a word I definitely want to circle back to. It sounds like a made-up buzzword, but the research behind it is actually fascinating.
It is. It's a huge piece of this puzzle. It helps explain not just Teal Swan, but so much of the modern wellness landscape.
So the mission for today is pretty clear. We want to peel back the layers. How did Teal Swan go from a small recital hall in Salt Lake City with, 20 people?
About 20 people, yeah.
How did she go from that to being the subject of major international documentaries? And what is she actually teaching that makes her so magnetic to some and so alarming to others?
And to understand the how, you really have to start with the who. And the story Teal Swan tells about her own life is the absolute foundation of everything she teaches.
It's the bedrock.
It is. It's the bedrock of her authority.
Right. So let's start there, the origin story. Because with influencers like this, the biography isn't just trivia, is it? It's part of the product. It's the credentials.
Absolutely. A doctor's authority comes from a degree on the wall. For a spiritual teacher like Swan, the authority comes from the life they've lived, from the obstacles they've overcome.
Okay, so the facts. She was born Mary Teal Bosworth, June 16th, 1984, born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but she grew up in Logan, Utah. And right away, her childhood narrative is, well, it's not typical.
Distinct is a very mild way to put it. From a very, very young age, Swan claimed she had extrasensory abilities.
What kind of abilities are we talking about here?
Well, she talks about telepathy. She talks about being able to communicate with the dead.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second. Imagine you're a little kid in Logan, Utah. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Logan is a pretty conservative, pretty religious area. It's not exactly a hub of New Age mysticism.
Not at all.
And you're telling the other kids on the playground that you can talk to ghosts. I just can't imagine that went over well.
According to her, it didn't. She says these claims led to just severe bullying, total social ostracism. She describes being completely isolated. And this is a key part of the story. She says it was that social rejection that eventually pushed her into the mental health system. It wasn't just that she was different. It was the world, a hostile reaction to her difference that started her journey with therapists.
Which is a really relatable narrative, right? For anyone who felt like an outsider. The world didn't get me, so they tried to fix me. It sets up a me versus the system dynamic from day one.
Exactly. But this is where the story takes a turn that, it honestly sounds like the plot of a dark thriller movie. But this involves a real person, a therapist named Barbara Snow. This was around 2006.
Barbara Snow, that name keeps popping up in the research. Who was she in this story?
Snow was a therapist working with Swan at the time, and she's the one who filed a police complaint.
A police complaint about what?
She alleged that Teal Swan had endured 12 years of ritual abuse.
12 years? That's
Yeah.
a massive allegation. And ritual abuse? Well, we're not just talking about a difficult childhood, are we? This implies something organized, something cult-like.
We are talking about organized, cult-like abuse, yes. The specific allegations were horrific. We're talking about being inducted into a satanic cult at age 6, being tortured, mind-controlled, being sewn into corpses. Just truly awful things.
Mad.
However, and this is critical detail, the legal outcome. The police investigated these claims.
Right.
The investigation was closed due to a lack of evidence.
So the case was closed. Legally, it went nowhere. The police looked. They didn't find the proof they needed. They shut the file. But the story itself didn't disappear.
No, it became central. And this is where it gets really fascinating if we zoom out a bit and look at the historical context.
Yeah.
Because you can't really understand this part of her story without understanding the cultural climate of the mental health world in the late 20th century.
You mean this kind of allegation wasn't totally out of the blue?
Far from it. Barbara Snow's claims about Swan align almost perfectly with a cultural phenomenon known as the Satanic Panic.
The Satanic Panic. I've heard of this. That was huge in the, late 80s and early 90s. It was all over the news.
It was everywhere. It was a period of widespread fear, tons of legal cases, all claiming that these underground satanic cults were abusing children on a massive organized scale. You had the McMartin preschool trial.
I remember hearing about that one. Tunnels under the school, stuff like that.
Exactly. And the Country Walk case with Frank Fuster cases in Kern County, Thurston County, It was a moral panic.
But didn't a lot of those cases fall apart later on?
They did. The McMartin trial was the longest, most expensive criminal trial in U.S. history at that point, and it ended with 0 convictions. Many of these cases were re-examined, and the whole narrative of a widespread satanic conspiracy just collapsed under scrutiny.
Why? What did they find?
They found that highly suggestive questioning techniques by therapists and investigators had, in many cases, actually implanted false memories in children and vulnerable adults. They were essentially creating the stories they were looking for.
So you're saying that the type of allegation that Barbara Snow made about Teal Swan, these recovered memories of horrific organized rituals, it fits that template.
It fits the template perfectly. Snow was operating within a therapeutic framework that was very focused on uncovering these exact kinds of repressed memories. The panic had peaked a bit earlier, but the practitioners and the theories didn't just vanish. They were still around in the 2000s.
So you have Swan, a young woman who already feels different and isolated.
Yes.
And she starts working with a therapist who is potentially looking for this very specific kind of narrative.
Precisely. And even though the legal case was closed, that narrative that she is a survivor of something incredibly dark and organized, it became absolutely central to Swan's identity.
It's like the origin story of a superhero, in a way. The hero's trauma is what gives them their power.
In a sense, yes. It establishes her as someone who has survived the absolute worst darkness imaginable and come out the other side. And just think about the authority that gives her.
It's immense.
If you're a listener who is depressed or anxious or dealing with your own trauma, and you see someone who says, I wasn't just abused, I was tortured by a cult for 12 years, and I survived, that is incredibly compelling.
It's an immediate hook. I survived this, so I can definitely help you survive your pain. It makes her not just a teacher, but a survivor guide. She's saying, I have walked through hell, so follow me. I know the path out.
Exactly. It positions her as someone who has been to the bottom of the well and knows the way back up. It's an authority that no university degree can possibly grant you.
Okay, so let's fast forward a little. The investigation is over. She starts building her own platform. It's 2011. She releases her first book, The Sculptor in the Sky.
And we have to remember, the beginning was humble. This wasn't an overnight viral sensation. In 2011, she held her first event. It was in a little recital hall in Salt Lake City.
And how many people were there?
About 20.
20 people. That is a world away from the millions of views she gets on a single video now. It really just shows the power of the internet to scale a message, doesn't it?
That's staggering.
But what is the message? We've talked about her life story, but what are the actual tools she's offering that took her from those 20 people to a global following? Because she's not just telling stories, she's giving very specific advice.
Right. She's very methodological.
Yeah.
And a huge turning point in her, let's call it her methodology, came in 2016 with a book published by Hay House. It's called the completion process, the practice of putting yourself back together again.
Putting yourself back together again. That's a pretty promising title if you're feeling broken. And Hay House, that's a big deal in the spiritual publishing world, right? That's Louise Hay's company.
It's a very big deal. It signaled her arrival in the mainstream self-help world. And the book itself details a specific 20-step healing journey.
20 steps, okay.
This is where we get into the practical side. The core of it involves something she calls creating a mental sanctuary.
A mental sanctuary. What does that mean? Is it like your happy place? You imagine a beach and a cocktail.
It's a little more active than that. The method asks you to create a safe mental space, a visualized environment where you feel completely secure. It could be a beach, a room, a forest, whatever works for you.
Okay.
But you don't just go there to escape. You use this sanctuary as a sort of home base to revisit traumatic memories.
Oof, revisiting trauma. That sounds intense. Most people try to run away from those memories.
It is deeply intense. The idea is you go back to the memory, but you do it from the safety of your sanctuary. You acknowledge the emotions, you validate them, you try to identify their origin, and then, this is the completion part, you perform a visualization, a ritual, to symbolize a new start or a resolution to that trauma.
Can you give me an example? Like, if I have a memory of being bullied at school, what would I do?
Well, in the visualization, you might bring your younger self, the child who was bullied, into the safety of your sanctuary. You might comfort them. You might mentally stand up to the bully in a way you couldn't back then. The goal is to rewrite the emotional ending of the scene.
So you're not changing what happened, but you're changing how it lives inside you now.
That's the theory. You're altering your relationship to the memory. And, it sounds a bit like certain therapeutic techniques, inner child work, parts work, even some elements of EMDR, but it's all packaged in this very specific 20-step spiritual framework.
It sounds very actionable. I can see the appeal. It gives you a to-do list for your pain. It's not just time heals all wounds. It's here are 20 concrete steps to heal the wound.
Exactly. It kind of gamifies the healing process. It gives structure to something trauma that often feels completely chaotic and uncontrollable.
And then just a couple of years later, 2018, she tackles another huge topic, maybe one of the biggest of our time, loneliness. She puts out a book called The Anatomy of Loneliness.
And this one is interesting because she tries to systematize a feeling. She breaks loneliness down into 3 pillars.
What are they?
Separation, shame, and fear.
Separation, shame, and fear. I feel like everyone listening can probably identify with that trio. Let's break those down. Separation seems pretty obvious.
Right. But she frames it as a perception of disconnection. It's not just about being physically alone. It's the core belief that you are fundamentally separate from everyone else. That feeling of, I'm over here and the rest of the world is over there.
And shame. What's the role of shame?
Shame is the belief that there's something wrong with you that causes the separation. I'm alone because I'm unlovable. I'm alone because I'm broken.
That's the kicker, isn't it? That's the one that keeps you stuck. Because if you think you're broken, you hide.
You hide, exactly. And that leads directly to the 3rd pillar, fear. You become afraid of connection. You're afraid that if you do try to connect, you'll just be hurt again, or they'll discover how broken you are. So you stay lonely to stay safe.
It's a vicious cycle. You're lonely, so you feel shame, which makes you fear connection, which keeps you lonely.
It is. And her book is about helping people find their way back to connection by addressing those 3 specific blockers. So again, she's identifying a deep, pervasive pain point in society and offering a structured way out.
It really seems like she has a knack for that. For identifying the things that hurt us the most. Trauma. Loneliness. She knows exactly where the bruises are.
She absolutely does. She has a high emotional intelligence for the zeitgeist of suffering. She knows what people are Googling at 3 in the morning.
It's so, and this is where we have to pivot. There is a huge difference between offering a structured way out of loneliness and some of the other advice she's given, because this is where the controversy part of our deep dive really kicks into high gear.
Yes.
We can't talk about Teal Swan without talking about the things that have made people very, very nervous.
We have to talk about her suicide visualization techniques. This is where critics and major media outlets like the BBC have raised really serious alarms.
Right. So in 2019, the BBC did a report. The reporter was Lebo Diseko, and they looked into Swan's stance on suicide. And it is. Well, it's not what you would hear on a crisis hotline.
No, it is not. Now, to be fair to the source material, Swan does explicitly urge people to seek medical help. She says that.
Okay.
However, she immediately follows that up by arguing that for some people, medical help might not work long term.
And that's But that worries people, right? It kind of undermines the recommendation immediately. Go see a doctor, but it probably won't work.
It does. And she introduces this concept of viewing suicide as a safety net or a reset button.
A reset button. That makes it sound like a video game, like you just restart the level if you mess up.
That is the exact metaphor she uses. Her logic, as she explains it, is that if people view suicide as an option that's always available, a reset button they can hit anytime, it paradoxically helps them set the idea aside.
How does that work?
So the thinking is, I can always do that later, so for right now, let me just focus on what I can do to feel better in the present.
I can sort of see the twisted logic there, like giving yourself permission to quit makes you feel less trapped. But calling it a reset button just feels incredibly risky. It minimizes the finality of it. It implies there's a game to return to after the reset.
And it gets more specific. And this is the part that is really, really difficult for mental health professionals to stomach. She suggests a visualization exercise.
What's the exercise?
She tells her viewers to lie on the floor and imagine their own deaths. And this is a, quote, grisly detail.
Grisly detail. Why? Why on earth would you want someone who is already suicidal to imagine their own death in grisly detail? That just sounds like a complete nightmare.
Her rationale is that by visualizing it so fully, the viewer will realize that there is, in her words, nowhere to go but back to life. The goal is to lead them to the conclusion that you don't want to die. What you want is an end to your pain.
Okay, that last part. You don't want to die. You want an end to your pain. That is a very standard, accepted suicide prevention concept. That's a good insight.
It is.
But getting there by imagining your own gory death, that seems like walking a tightrope over a canyon without a net for the person watching at home.
It's a very high-stakes psychological gamble.
Mm-hmm.
Swan also argues that it shows the devastating ripple it would cause for loved ones, so she frames it as a deterrent. But any mental health expert will tell you the risk is massive. If you have a vulnerable person alone in their room visualizing their suicide, that is dangerously close to rehearsal.
Exactly. That's the word, rehearsal. It's the difference between being in a controlled environment with a licensed therapist who can intervene and just watching a YouTube video alone at 2 a.m.
Precisely. In a clinical setting, if a patient starts going down that path, a therapist is there to ground them, to pull them back. On YouTube, there is no one. The video ends, the next one autoplays, and that person is left alone with those images.
And that tension between her charismatic, seemingly helpful advice and the potential for real-world harm, that's what attracted the attention of investigative journalists, right, Ner?
Yes. When you have millions of followers and you're talking about suicide this way, people are going to start paying very close attention.
Which brings us to the gateway.
Right? The Gizmodo podcast from 2018.
I remember when that came out. It was hosted by Jennings Brown, a 6-part series, and it really put Swan on the map for a much more skeptical audience.
Brown spent a lot of time analyzing her techniques, especially around depression and trauma. And he noticed something really interesting about how she presents herself.
What was that?
He noted that she doesn't look or market herself like a regular spiritual leader. She's not in flowing robes on a mountaintop. She's incredibly internet savvy. She's modern. She looked like an influencer, but she talks like a guru.
It's a powerful combination. It disarms you. You think, oh, she's cool. She gets it. And then 10 minutes later, she's talking about interdimensional beings.
Yeah.
But then there's the C word.
The cult question.
Yeah. It's the elephant in the room. Jennings Brown wrote an article with the headline, Internet Spiritual Guru Teal Swan says she isn't a cult leader, but has the perfect recipe for a cult.
That's quite a headline.
It's a hell of a headline. I'm not a cult leader, but I have the recipe. It's like saying I'm not a baker, but I have flour, sugar, and eggs in the mixer.
It highlights that ambiguity perfectly. She has the devoted following, the special knowledge from her extrasensory abilities, the charismatic leader at the center. All the ingredients are there. But it operates in this decentralized digital way that doesn't always look like the cults we imagine from the 70s.
Right, there's no compound out in the desert, or is there? Because eventually, people did start looking at her inner circle, and that was the focus of the documentary The Deep End, wasn't it?
Exactly. That came out in 2022 on Freeform. And it was a major production. They filmed with her in her inner circle for over 3 years.
So this wasn't about her YouTube videos anymore. This was about the people living with her, working for her, day in and day out.
Yes. And the documentary detailed some very strict rules for her inner circle. It insinuated some very controlling and manipulative behavior.
The vibe I got from reading about it was just intense control. It felt almost like a reality TV show version of a high-control group.
There were scenes that were very uncomfortable to watch. Inner circle members being sort of publicly interrogated about their loyalty or their shadows in front of the whole group.
Public shaming disguised as spiritual accountability?
That's how many critics viewed it. But to be fair, Swan did not take that lying down.
No, she's a fighter. She doesn't just take criticism.
She disputed the whole characterization. She claimed the filmmakers used deceptive practices, that they edited the footage to create a false narrative. She said they took moments of intense group therapy and framed them as abuse. She even shared a petition demanding they release the raw, unedited footage.
It's the classic he said, she said, but with hundreds of hours of footage at stake. And it does raise questions about documentary ethics, how much you can shape reality in the edit.
It does. But regardless of the editing, the behavior that was caught on camera was enough to make a lot of people deeply uncomfortable. And we should also mention there was an earlier documentary, Open Shadow, from 2017.
Right.
That one was often seen as more sympathetic, or at least less critical. It shows how the narrative around her has shifted over time as her influence has grown. In 2017, she was a curiosity. By 2022, she was a target for investigation.
So we have the journalists, we have the documentarians. But what about the academics? You mentioned earlier that researchers have started studying her as a specific type of influencer.
This is where it gets really interesting for anyone who follows sociology or cultural trends. Two academics, Sandra Barros and Jennifer Sandlin, published a paper identifying Swan as part of this cohort they call conspiritual life coaches.
Okay, let's go back to that word, conspiritual. It's a mashup of conspiracy and spirituality.
Exactly. It describes the fusion of conspiracy rhetoric, distrust of the establishment, belief in secret truths, with commercial wellness culture.
So yoga and moon crystals meet QAnon and anti-vax sentiment.
Well, that's a blunt way to put it, but yes, it's that Venn diagram. Think about it. If you believe the government is poisoning your food, which is a conspiracy mindset.
You might turn to organic, holistic diets, which is a wellness solution.
Exactly. If you believe Big Pharma is evil and trying to keep you sick.
Yeah. You might turn to energy healing or alternative medicine.
The common ground is they are lying to you. The system is corrupt.
I see. It's a shared distrust of authority.
Correct. So Barros and Sandlin identified 5 overlapping strategies that Swan and others like her allegedly use to build this kind of following. It's like a toolkit for building a modern cult of personality.
Okay, let's go through them. What's number 1?
First is body purity. The idea that you must purify yourself from the toxins of the modern world.
That sounds like standard wellness stuff. Detoxes, cleanses.
It is, but in the conspiro context, it's not just about health, it's about moral purity. You are clean, and the outside world is dirty. It creates a very strong us versus them dynamic based on what you consume.
Got it. Okay, number 2.
Second is reinforced gender binaries. Despite the very modern, edgy look, the underlying teachings often reinforce very traditional, almost rigid ideas of masculine and feminine energy.
Interesting. So men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of thinking.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Which can be very appealing to people who feel lost or confused by modern gender dynamics. It offers simple, clear rules. It says, you're unhappy because you aren't embracing your true feminine essence, or whatever it might be.
What's number 3?
Third is trauma exploitation. And this goes back to what we discussed earlier. It's using trauma not just as something to heal, but as a form of currency or identity. I am special because of my trauma.
That feels like a dangerous trap. It could encourage you to stay identified with your pain. Like if you heal completely, do you lose your status in the group?
That's the risk.
Yeah.
The fourth strategy is appropriation of indigenous practices. So using rituals, symbols, or concepts borrowed from indigenous cultures, but stripped of their original context or lineage.
Which we see all the time in New Age circles. Shamanism, smudging, spirit animals.
Exactly. It adds an air of ancient, esoteric wisdom without the actual commitment to or respect for the culture it comes from. And the fifth strategy.
Go for it.
Commodified spirituality. Turning spiritual enlightenment into a product that can be bought and sold.
Through the workshop, the book, the $100 webinar, the $5,000 retreat.
Exactly. The premium subscription. When you list them all out like that, it really does sound like a formula, doesn't it?
It does. It explains why it's so effective. It validates your pain and your distrust of the system, and then it sells you a solution that only the leader can provide. It's brilliant marketing, even if you disagree with the ethics.
It's incredibly effective.
Yeah.
It creates this closed loop where the only trustworthy source of information is the teacher.
Now, we've talked a lot about her nonfiction and her teachings, but she did something that surprised me. She pivoted to fiction in 2020. She released a young adult novel called Hunger of the Pine.
Which is a fascinating move for a spiritual teacher, isn't it? Usually they stick to self-help manuals, but this is a narrative story. It's about a character named Aria Abbott.
And what's her story?
Aria is a homeless teenager who is fleeing an abusive foster care system. The story follows her journey to Los Angeles with another character named Taylor.
So, heavy themes again. Abuse, homelessness, the system failing a child. She's definitely not writing fluffy romance novels.
Not at all. But reviewers, like one named Chandra Claypool, noted that the book really tries to challenge societal perceptions of homelessness. Swan seems to be using the fiction format to advocate for empathy for that community.
It's like she's trying to reach a different audience or maybe express her core themes in a less direct way. Fiction lets you show, not just tell.
Or maybe it's another way to process those themes of abandonment and survival that are so central to her own brand. It lets her explore that system failing the child narrative without it being explicitly about her own biography. It's a parallel universe for her ideas.
It broadens the Teal Swan universe.
It does. And speaking of her brand, she also updated one of her earlier books, Shadows Before Dawn, and re-released it as How to Love Yourself.
Love yourself. It's such a cliche, right? Everyone says it. You just need to love yourself more. But how do you actually do that? It feels so abstract.
Well, this book contains what is probably her most practical and widely quoted piece of advice. It's a single question she suggests using as a compass for all of your decision-making.
A compass. I think we could all use one of those. What's the question?
The question is, what would someone who loves themselves do?
What would someone who loves themselves do?
Simple, isn't it?
You know, amidst all the controversy, the ritual abuse stories, the suicide visualizations, that is actually a really solid, helpful question.
It is. The reviewer, Regina Brett, highlighted it. It's a simple, grounding mantra. If you're about to eat something or call an ex or accept a job, you just stop and ask, what would someone who loves themselves do in this situation? It cuts through so much noise.
It really does, because sometimes you don't feel like you love yourself. You might feel like absolute garbage, but you can probably imagine what a person who did love themselves would do, and then you mimic that action.
Exactly. It bypasses the feeling and goes straight to the behavior. It's behavioral activation, essentially. And this brings up a crucial point about her appeal.
What's that?
It shows why people stick with her. If everything she said was crazy or dangerous, she wouldn't have a following. It's this cocktail, this mix of genuinely helpful, resonant advice like that question, blended with the more extreme, controversial stuff that makes it so hard for people to untangle.
That's the duality. You can't just dismiss her as a total charlatan, because for a lot of people, that simple question might have genuinely changed their life for the better.
And that makes them trust her on the other stuff. She was right about the self-love question, so maybe she's also right about the suicide visualization. That's the slippery slope.
Before we wrap up, we should probably touch briefly on her personal life, since that's often part of the public lore for these kinds of influencers.
It is. Followers feel like they know them personally. Her relationships have been quite public. She was married to a man named Mark Scott back in 2006, and they had a son that same year. They divorced, and then she later married a French tech entrepreneur named Al Jicot in 2016.
A tech entrepreneur. That kind of fits the internet guru vibe.
It does. They divorced in 2018, and more recently, reports have linked her romantically to a former follower, Jared Dobson. She currently resides back in Utah with her son.
So she's back in Utah, full circle, back to where it all began.
Full circle.
So, what does this all mean? We've looked at the bio, the books, the scandal, the academic analysis. We have a woman who claims to talk to the dead, who tells suicidal people to visualize their own deaths, who writes YA novels about homelessness, and who is accused of using a conspiritual playbook to run a high-control group.
It's a lot to process. But I think the key takeaway is the sheer power of narrative. Swan has constructed this narrative of ultimate survival. I survived the worst abuse, the worst isolation, the worst pain. Therefore, I know the way out.
And in a world where so many people feel lonely, remember her book on loneliness, and feel like the traditional systems have failed them, that promise of a secret way out is incredibly seductive.
It's incredibly seductive. And it matters because it highlights this new landscape of mental health advice. Influencers like Swan completely bypass the traditional gatekeepers. There's no board of ethics for a YouTube channel.
Right. If a licensed therapist told you to visualize your suicide in grisly detail, they would lose their license. They'd be sued. If a YouTuber does it, they get 1 million views.
And it forces us, and you, the listener, to question that line between alternative healing and dangerous manipulation. At what point does spiritual coaching become practicing psychology without a license? And at what point does a devoted community become a controlling cult?
And here's a thought I want to leave everyone with. In this era of rampant loneliness that Swan herself describes so well, are we becoming too willing to hand over our psychological autonomy to anyone who comes along and claims they can reset our pain?
And to add to that, when a teacher claims they can see things that you can't, like the dead or the future or the true version of your trauma that even you don't remember does yet, accepting their help required total submission to their reality.
Wow.
Because once you agree that they can see the invisible and you can't, you've essentially given away your power to judge what is real for yourself.
That is a chilling thought. If they hold the keys to reality, you're just a guest living in their world. You're just renting space in their universe.
Exactly. And the rent can be very, very high.
Well, on that note, we are going to wrap up this deep dive. Whether you see Teal Swan as a healer or a hazard, there's just no denying she is one of the most significant and polarizing figures in the modern spiritual landscape.
Absolutely. A figure worth understanding, even if you don't agree with the teachings. Maybe especially if you don't agree with them.
Thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay critical, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Take care.